The following is my conversation with Fran Millar, CEO of Rapha. It's hard to overstate the importance of Rapha in the cycling clothing industry. They have had an incredible impact on innovation as well as the look of cycling over the last 15 years. Their mainstream influence and essentially bringing new riders to the sport has been absolutely phenomenal. I speak with a lot of people and I get a lot of feedback from people in the industry, fans, and without a doubt, Rapha is still one of the most important topics in terms of the fascination around cycling and cycling business in particular. I've interviewed Simon, the founder of Rapha, who exited a few years back, and so now Fran is on board and working with the Walton family. She's tasked with providing her vision and helping the company grow after a few years, not just for them but for everyone after COVID and sort of the overstock, as we all know, situation. So it's exciting to hear her take on where she came from, but obviously where she's taking the brand. So this is a special interview for me in particular, and I'm glad to be able to share it with you all. So, Fran Millar, thank you so much for coming on today. I appreciate it. I imagine you are very busy, but you are being generous with your time, and I think this is going to be a really fun conversation. I've had a lot of curiosity around. I feel like Rapha is, in terms of, since I started writing and recording about the business of cycling, Rapha is sort of an enigma in a sense that it's really been a huge part of cycling in the last, especially obviously in the last 15 years. People are curious about it. Everything that happened with Simon and then now has just been really, really innovative and interesting. And so I'm so really, really happy to have you on today. So where does this podcast find you?
So I'm sat in one of the offices in our North London headquarters called Service Course. And I am, like you say, busy in the middle of all kinds of planning and work. But so here in London.
I think that's an understatement. I know that you've got a lot of responsibility on your shoulders. So hopefully we can shed some light on everything that you're doing. And I think people will really be curious to hear about it. And I know I am. And this is kind of one of the reasons why I started this podcast. I did interview Simon a couple months ago, maybe last year it's been already. And just understanding why and how things are done, I think, is something that doesn't get talked about enough. So I appreciate you being part of this. And maybe to start, can we just hear about kind of where you're from, and then we can go from there?
Yeah, sure. So born in the north of Scotland, I moved down to the south in England with my parents. My father was in the military. We spent most of our childhood. I have an older brother. And then down in the southeast of England, my parents got divorced. My brother went with my dad to live in Hong Kong. I stayed in the UK with my mum. And I basically left school at 18, decided I wanted a job. I've worked ever since, and now find myself here as CEO of Rapha.
I've interviewed David. And we got the Hong Kong side of the story. So your brother is David Millar, the ex-rider in Chapter 3, and now he's with Factor. So just to clarify, so you got out of school, and was your mom, what sort of work did she do? I'm just trying to understand, contextualize kind of what you grew up around.
My mum is a fierce firebrand second wave feminist from Glasgow. Oh. She ran her own business. She was an engineer, studied engineering in the 70s at Glasgow University. Very unusual choice of degree for a woman in the 70s. And then she ran her own, she did a bit of teaching, and then she went running her own financial advisory business, which even to this day she still does, sort of non-exec positions on various boards. Yeah, she's a powerhouse. So I was brought up by a very strong female influence.
And so what did you take from that sort of example? Was that something that really gave a sort of an impression on you on where you wanted to go with your life?
Yeah, it's interesting actually. It's probably only been in this sort of later section of my career that I've really noticed the impact of it. I spent most of my career in a male dominated industry. Professional men's road cycling is is male dominated by the nature of it. And obviously my first role was I set up my own agency with the intention of managing David, which went on to become probably the biggest athlete and event management agency specific to cycling in the UK. So I did that from 2000 to 2007. And then I think, obviously I had spent some significant period of my career at Team Sky actually running a professional road team.
Right.
So it was only really when I went into BellStaff, which was the fashion brand I got given to turn around back in 2020, that my own leadership style and my own approach really was something I had to think about and had to kind of hone and develop and sort of put some time and energy into. And I think over the course of the last, what's now been nearly 6 years, I've noticed actually quite a lot more the influence that my mum probably had on me, and being raised in an environment where, feminism and, women can do anything men can do, and equal opportunities and get paid the same amount of money and all of those kinds of things. It made me realize how, sort of fundamental and foundational that upbringing had been.
So you got out of school and you just started working. It sounds like would have been for your brother. Was that sort of the first, you mentioned that you had kind of managed him and helped sports marketing and sort of promoting his, I don't want, how would you call it, brand, or as sort of an agent?
Yeah, I mean,
what was exactly were you doing for David?
I was actually, it was pretty serendipitous actually, because I left school with the intention of and this was like genuine stated ambition, whereas all of my friends were going to university. It was in the late 90s, so in 1998, all of my friends had done their UCAS applications, were going to university, and I just didn't want to go to uni. I didn't want to do further education. So I had this like sort of determination I was going to find a job that was going to mean that by the time my friends graduated, I would be earning more money than them. So I ended up actually working for a gentleman called Anthony Bouchier, and he had just bought the rights to the Wisden Almanac, which is the oldest cricket almanac in the world, and he bought them for online. So this was 1999.
Sure.
And in those days, obviously, the idea of buying up data, analog data, and putting it onto the internet was like totally revolutionary. And everyone was like, no one's ever going to go on the internet to look at the Wisden Almanac. So, which shows what people know. And so I was working for him. I'd moved to London. And he, in his past, had been the manager of Bjorn Borg, the tennis player. And I came into work one day after David had taken the yellow jersey on his debut Tour de France opening stage of the prologue of Futuroscope. And Anthony said to me, is that your brother? That because obviously I talked about the fact that he was a pro cyclist. And I said, yes, that's my brother. And he actually said to me, you should have a think about managing him. And I was like, well, I've never done management before in my life. And he said, well, you're not. At the point in time, I was his PA. He said, well, you're not a very good PA, but I think you'd be a very good manager. So, damned with faint praise. And so he was very generous with his time, generous with his advice. It sounded like a fun and exciting thing to be doing. So I basically went in with the intention of, how can you monetize and commercialize a professional road cyclist? So we set up a fan club, and we put the fan club behind a paywall on the internet, like it's bonkers. Miller Time was the name of the fan club. And yeah, I just thought it would be a fun thing to do. I loved the idea of being, sort of master of my own destiny. And quite quickly, obviously, because David was well connected and pretty well known, a few of his, friends, colleagues, I started to work a little bit with them. And then again, very quickly, we ended up doing some work with the Great Britain Cycling Federation, because in 2003, there's a velodrome in London called the Herne Hill Velodrome, which was built for the 1998 Olympic Games. And they had been doing for 50, 60 years, they've been doing an event called the Good Friday meeting, which was a track meeting on Good Friday, clues in the name. And it had been declining in popularity year on year on year. But in its heyday, Merckx had ridden there. And, so it was this real like throwback to the great days of British cycling with a small c. And so we were approached by the promoters actually to get Bradley McGee and David to come and ride at a 4-point pursuit at the track. And I said to David, did he want to do it? And he was like, oh, why don't you ask them if you can promote it? So I was like, okay. So we basically said, yeah, we'll bring our athletes, but we want to do all the promotion. I think up until that point, the Good Friday meeting had been running for about a decade on about, 800 to 1,000 people showing up. And a great testament to the sort of community that has kept British cycling alive over the years, because it was, people putting their own money into it and their own time and effort. And so James Pope, who was my business partner at the time, we basically did all the promotion. We got it in Time Out. We got loads of great riders there. We really went for it. And they ended up having about 6,000 people. And it just put us on the map. And Dave Brailsford was running the British Cycling Organisation at that point in time. And he approached us and said, did we want to work with him to do something similar, but at the Manchester Velodrome? And so that's what got us into events.
And so it feels like you were very quickly, it seems like you were like a fish to water with this whole concept, because some people, they go and they study economics or they study engineering, but it feels like you had a pretty strong entrepreneurial or perhaps self-sufficient viewpoint on, I want to go do something, I want to build something on my own, and just, be damned anybody that gets in my way. Am I reading that correctly?
A little bit. I mean, interestingly, I wouldn't ever describe myself as entrepreneurial. I've always been very good at seeing opportunity, and I've always been very good at absolutely making the most out of the opportunities that I'm given. So I probably wouldn't have come up with the idea of doing the Good Friday promotion myself. I probably wouldn't have come up with the idea of going and doing a track series at the Manchester Velodrome if it hadn't been for Brailsford suggesting it. So I'm not necessarily, the genesis of the idea isn't necessarily the thing which I always think is the entrepreneurial trait, right? You've got the idea and you can deliver it. I'm very much that if there's a good idea and I think, I could make that happen, then I will throw myself into it and go all in, and normally I'll over deliver. So I am fiercely ambitious, but I'm really hardworking, and I've got a really, really high standard that I set for myself and for the people I work with. So that tends to result in pretty good outcomes so far.
Yeah, it's your CV speaks for itself. And so from your time with David and the events that you were promoting, you began then expanding this business, doing more events, promotion throughout the early 2000s.
Yeah, we pretty much stuck with just Revolution, which was the track event that we were doing. So 4 events a year in the off season of the road calendar. We do 2 this side of Christmas, 2 the other side of Christmas. They were sellout events. It was in the build up to kind of the Athens Olympic game, and then between the Athens and Athens and Beijing cycle. So we kind of had that groundswell of British cycling was coming through. Lottery funding was starting to deliver. Cycling in and of itself was getting more popular in the UK. So by 2007, we had been running Revolution for 3 years, 4 years. We were representing about 15 of the big athletes in the sport, like Geraint Thomas, Ian Stannard, Pete Kenyon, Mark Cavendish. And so then the Tour de France came to London in 2007, and we decided to host a party, just a pure party for our athletes, our colleagues, our clients. And we did it on the course of the prologue. And that's for the first time, that's when Brailsford mentioned to me this idea of, did I think it would be possible to set up a British team capable of winning the Tour? Because the Tour de France was starting in the UK. There were 5 different riders in the race. All 5 of them were in different teams, and I represented 4 of them. So it was like there was this natural synergy between what Great Britain Cycling were doing on the track. They were obviously, in many ways, they were creating this incredible talent pipeline, because the best way to train for the track in the winter is to race on the road in the summer. And so Dave was like, if we could marry those 2 things together and create a British team capable of winning the Tour, we could eradicate a lot of the sort of club versus country issues that the team was having at that point in time, but also take on the challenge that no one thought possible, which was winning the Tour with a clean British rider. So by end of 2007, I was pretty deep in building out what would become Team Sky. In 2007, I had also, the other thing we did deliver was the Nocturne. So Simon Mottram had approached me as well, really early days in Rapha, and said, you guys are doing some great stuff in the track. Would you be interested in doing a kind of a criterium with us in central London? So I've had an affinity with Rapha right from the very early days of Rapha as well, because we put the Nocturne in that summer as well. So in 2007.
This is really serendipitous, but it sounds like you had these opportunities and you were able to capitalize on them in an effective way. And so you ran Team Sky for how many years?
So I went in as Dave Brailsford's project manager in 2007 and built the whole plan out with Sky through 2008, 2009. I started as kind of like director of business operations, so running all things off bike. And I was there.
Sponsors.
Sponsors, legal.
Operations.
Exactly. World Tour license, buses, trucks, mechanics, carers, the whole shebang. And then by sort of 2013, I'd pretty much become like, I was one of the leaders. I was, I then got given the head of winning behavior. So I was in charge of culture and people. And then, got formally made CEO in 2018. And then we got bought by Jim Ratcliffe, and I stayed with the team all the way through till 2020. So what's that? 12 years, terrifyingly.
Hey, it's Wyatt here. So here's a stat that should get every cycling brand's attention. 65% of all product searches now begin on Amazon. Not your website, not retailer sites, Amazon. Here's a question for any brand managers or business owners listening. Do you know who's selling your brand products on Amazon right now? Chances are your distributors and dealers are already there. And if you're not actively managing that presence, you're losing control of pricing, brand story, and your customer experience. So my agency works exclusively with cycling brands, and we help build and manage their Amazon presence, from listing optimization to driving sales, as well as Amazon advertising. We've helped brands increase their revenue by 50 to 70% in just the first year. So if you're interested, you can drop me an email at wyatt@velomedia.io. That's wyatt@velomedia.io. Now let's get back to the show. For me, it's kind of, there's a lot to talk about here, right?
Yeah.
Because like, I know Team Sky was revolutionary and you were part of that. Today, I really want to understand what you took away from those experiences and kind of where you're applying all this experience now, because you have a huge responsibility right now to a brand, the brand Rapha, which is, clothing's not an easy business. I know that it's not an easy business. There's a lot of small brands out there. And I guess I would like to jump into Rapha now, because I know that this is the what you're doing now, and you're taking on this opportunity, which the brand, as maybe not everyone knows, but the brand is owned by a family office, which are the Walton brothers, cousins.
Yeah, they're Sam Walton's grandsons. So yeah, two brothers.
Right, and they are investing heavily in cycling in Bentonville, Arkansas, which is the home office of Walmart. And so you have this mandate now to take Rapha and to grow it, to develop it. And this is not an easy opportunity for you, I imagine. Why did you take this job, and how is it going?
I'm nearly a year in. Why did I take this job? No, So I took the job because a host of reasons. I had been the transition between Team Sky and Team Ineos, we were bought by Ineos, who is owned by Britain's richest man, in inverted commas, Jim Ratcliffe. And so I went and worked within Ineos for 18 months. Because of the pandemic and various other things that were going on, I ended up working across quite a lot of projects. One of them was the Eliud Kipchoge sub-2-hour marathon project, which I worked on, and basically was effectively the CEO of that challenge. I then helped the build and creation of the Ineos Hygienics brand, which is the sort of hand sanitizer during the pandemic. We were giving out that whilst also being the CEO of the cycling team. And so in the September of 2020, Jim asked me if I would go and run his fashion brand. So it's called BellStaff, 100-year-old heritage brand in the UK, men's contemporary fashion. I knew nothing about it, and I was asked to go in and turn it around, given 5 sort of key things that he wanted me to do, and did it. And so I was 4 years into that project of turnaround. And, I don't think I'd be disclosing any confidences to say that, the end of 2023, Jim had just bought Man United. The focus of Ineos had moved quite really significantly to sport. It was, sport had been like one of the many cool, exciting things that Ineos did. It had become the exciting thing that Ineos did beyond petrochemicals, and fashion just wasn't going to be a part of that vision. And I didn't want to go and work in football. So I was starting to think about where would my career go next, and what would I do? And would I want to go back to sport, or would I want to go and stay in like apparel or retail or, whatever? And I was having various conversations with, private equity people that I know, just a whole host of mentors, and just having like really informal conversations. Like I wasn't in any rush to move. I really loved Ineos. I loved working there. I loved BellStaff, but I recognized that the end of the road was coming. And I happened to speak to the family of the fund manager for the family office that you've just mentioned, a guy called Matt Tarver, in the end of 23, early 24, and also to Nick Evans, who had been the chairman of Rapha for the first 15 years of its existence. And out of the blue, so they knew I was kind of speculatively looking. And out of the blue, they contacted me in June of 24 and said they were thinking about, a different approach, a new strategy, bringing in a different CEO. Would I be interested? And speaking openly, I can't even explain how, excited is probably the wrong word, but how I was like, it felt like destiny. I was like, oh
that
my
was the
God.
type of opportunity you were looking for.
Yeah, I was like,
Okay.
oh my God, it's a fashion apparel design
Sports.
led sport. It's cycling. It's not just cycling. It's like the most established, the most well respected, the one that arguably created the category. It's the two things that well, certainly on one side, I absolutely know inside out, like from a cycling perspective,
Sure.
I believe it. And from apparel, I've learned so much in the 4 years that I've been doing BellStaff that I feel I could go and take on this challenge and do it justice. I still have an inordinate amount to learn from an apparel and retail perspective, but I
Of
felt
course.
confident that I could get the right team around me here to help me do it. So yeah, so I met with the relevant people. It moved really fast. I handed in my notice at BellStaff in the July. I had a bit of summer downtime and handing over my role at BellStaff, and then I started mid-September 2024. So nearly a year in. It's going brilliantly. It's everything I hoped it would be and more. It's very intense. There's a huge amount to do. And I think it's very generous of you to say that I'm here to lead the business to growth. I absolutely am here to do that, but I first have to fix it. And there's quite a lot of things to fix that I think
Operationally or what?
end to end, everything. I think from a product perspective, from a structure and people perspective, from a balance sheet and P&L perspective, from
Small
pretty much everything.
details.
Yeah, end to end, end to end. And I think that I knew it was going to be that. I probably didn't quite grasp the full challenge. Like Rapha it's a beast of a business, right? I felt a huge burden of responsibility at BellStaff because it was so old and because so many people loved it. Here it's like 10x that, this,
Yeah,
if not 100x. Yeah.
so there's a place in Rapha where I'll tell you a story. So this is a great example. So I have a sweatshirt, like a hoodie with the
Yeah.
pink Rapha logo on it. And if you want to just kind of have it tip your hat to, I'm in the know.
There you go.
That's something. Like, I don't know how Simon did it, but he was able to just compress everything about cycling and elegance and travel and just the beautiful parts of road cycling. He was able to really sort of solidify that. So it's what you had mentioned, that and it's undoubtedly they were able to do something that no one else was able to do, and they sort of everybody was sort of on their heels. Like,
Yeah.
I'm going to give you some of my personal anecdotes. I've worked for brands in clothing, and the brands they were doing teams, and there wasn't a fashion element very present in the cycling apparel for a long time. And Rapha sort of was able to, bring that in and make cycling clothing elegant in a certain sense. It's a huge, there's also, it sounds like, a lot of baggage behind all that because of operational choices that were made, because of the size of the company. And so it sounds like you're trying to right size everything in a sense that, from your standpoint, that is going to make this brand very healthy for today and for the future. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a burden of responsibility because for all the things you've just said and for the place it holds in so many people's hearts, it's so much more than a brand. It's so much more than a clothing company, that's for sure. And I think that my job here is to, I sort of, in my head, it's a little bit like I've got this really complex jigsaw that I've got to put together, but the pieces feel a little bit like they're made of glass sometimes, so it's like you don't want to click them in too hard because it's like, well, that's smash. So I'm trying to do it I have you may have noticed, I'm fast moving, fast paced, go at a million miles an hour. I'm a seek forgiveness, don't ask permission type person. And here I have tried very hard to be far more measured, be far more thoughtful, be far more considered, but without second guessing myself, because it's a really tricky balance where you've got everyone has an opinion, Everyone thinks they know what's the
Sure.
best thing to do
There's a
outside.
lot of subjectivity around everything you're
Yeah.
doing.
Oh yeah. So from the inside, the outside, you've got this concept, and it's significantly more scrutiny than I've ever been under in my career.
100%.
I didn't have, I managed very successfully and quite deliberately throughout my time at Team Sky to stay under the radar. I loved doing my job. I loved being behind the scenes. I know my contribution and I know what I did. I never felt the need to sort of come out from behind the curtain and talk about it. Whereas Rapha, you're not just out from behind the curtain, you're stood front and center on the stage with a spotlight on you. So it's a very different beast in that sense. And I have really only realized the magnitude of that over the last probably 5 months, 6 months. The first 6 months I was like, right, let's go. I can do this. I know the plan. I'm going to figure this out. And actually this last 6 months, I think I felt far more of a sense of, oh God, wow, everyone's watching. Shit.
I'm nodding. I'm nodding. People can't see it, but I'm nodding. I can tell you with no doubt that, there's the S and then there's Rapha, and and then, those are, the brands that are sort of the torchbearers of the industry right now. I wanted to talk about your relationship with the owners, like not in this specific role, but in general. It sounds like that's a huge piece of your job, in a sense that when you were at Ineos, when you were at Sky, when you were at Belstaff, that you have to communicate very effectively what you're doing, why you're doing it, and why you came to that conclusion. Is that I guess naturally that's a big part of your job. Can you talk about that? Because I think that you are deploying resources for these companies with a huge amount of responsibility. So how are you the conduit with the ownership in this way? Like, what do you try and do to make this as elegant or as effective as possible?
Yeah, I mean, I think, throughout the course of my career, I've been very lucky in that I've had very good owners, whether that's, working directly into sort of Sky and the board that we had there with sort of Jeremy Darroch and the like. And then going into Ineos, where there's a very, very clear structure around how, ExCo, as they call it, executive committee, is run all the businesses, whether you're a petrochemical business, a fashion business, or a sports business, they're structured in the same way and the reporting line is the same. And the CEO holds a huge amount of sway and power in that organization. And then here, different again, but similar, right? I've got, I have a board. There's owner representation on that board, and my job is to, like you say, take the board on the journey. I think I naturally want to take people with me when I do things. I also think, to the burden of responsibility, our owners and the ownership of this particular business, they've invested very heavily. They bought
Sure.
it 7 years ago. They've never really seen a return.
Right. They bought it at the wrong time. I mean, we can say that
Yeah, and
in the
I think,
market.
the reality of it is, I never believe in looking back and saying what would you do differently. And I think that, we're incredibly lucky to have the owners that we have who are as passionate as they are about cycling. I mean, I've been to Bentonville and I've seen the programs that are there, and it's a very, very privileged position to be in. We're the biggest brand
Sure.
in the sport, and we have the best owners, and they are deeply passionate about bike riding, the transformative power of the sport, the role that they can play in that as well, and that each of their brands can play in that. And I think that is a unique, I know people use the word unique a lot, but it's a genuinely unique position. So, my job here is, and as it has been throughout my career, you're spending someone else's money and you're basically building someone else's legacy. And I take that very, very seriously. And I think, our owners deserve, and Rapha deserves, the chance to be back to his very best. And I think that's the way I approach it. So I'm an over communicator where I can be. So, share as much information as possible. I've always been a tic-tac on WhatsApp with everyone and anyone who I have a senior reporting line into, because I think day to day, I'm not a big believer in that kind of wait 3 months and tell you everything all at once. You need to have a regular dialogue particularly when you're doing a turnaround of this size and scale. You need to be constantly going at it and providing communication. And in Tava, who's the chairman of our board and the fund manager, he's fantastic. I probably speak to him every day.
Yeah, and that sort of communication, your goal is to provide as much detail as which allows them to see why you're doing the things you're doing. Now, from the looking up, now we're looking down. How are you now applying your sort of style, or like with your management team?
Yeah.
So how does that, it's sort of the inverse, right? Where they need to tell you what they're seeing, so there's like a bi-directional
Yeah.
conversation with the ownership and then with what's happening on the ground. Can you talk about that a little bit as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think I came in here. There was pretty, and again, I don't think it's a disclosing a comment. They've been pretty dysfunctional, might be too extreme, but certainly an unusual leadership structure over the course of the 7 years since acquisition.
You saw some
Short.
opportunities for improvement.
Yeah, there we go. That's the way to put it. So I have worked quite quickly on, building the leadership team around me that I need. I think we've probably still got a few little gaps to fill. But again, it's about communication, clarity, accountability, ownership, all the things that you learn when you're in a professional sports team. It's like, you need people to know where they're going, know how they're going to get there, know how they're going to measure it, have the tools they need to do the job, be supported and encouraged to do it, and have regular sort of ability to check and challenge the plan. So I think we've very consciously spent this first year building out what we're sort of calling ready to race. So building out a plan that is, in this first year, it's not going to be about getting back to winning straight away. And I think, one of the things that I brought to the business when I started actually was the idea of the kind of the high performance cycle. If you look at any team that's been incredibly successful, they all come off the boil at some point in time, and they all go through a decline period. They all go through a plateau period. Then they start building back up again and they get back to winning. And that cycle is something that people try and shortcut. They sort of think to themselves, oh, we're declining now, but if we stop and we just start winning again, it just doesn't work like that. The period of decline has often been going on for longer than you think, first and foremost. Stopping decline, arresting decline always takes longer than you think. And then building back up again to build back the muscle, the rigor, the detail that's needed. So kind of that setting up for excellence where you're building like muscle memory in the business. You're getting people all on the same page. You're creating alignment. You're creating clarity. You're building trust. All those things. You can't shortcut that. And it would be lovely to say I can turn this business around in a year, but it would be a lie. You can't. It's probably going to take 3 years, and we're not quite a year into it. But that sort of building now in that setting up for excellence and getting back to kind of really rapid acceleration towards success. That bit is the really fun, exciting bit. And it's the bit I love. I've always said throughout my career that having been a part of a team that's won the Tour de France 7 times, that day on the Champs-Élysées is never the best day. The
Why?
best days, well, because the best days are those days where you're trying to figure shit out and you're all deep in it, and it's 11 o'clock at night and everyone's going all in, and it's like, oh my God, how are we going to do this? I don't know. And there's a problem, and something's happened at Tenerife camp, and you've got to get some, that kind of the frenetic high energy nature of being in an organization that's moving at pace, pulling in the same direction, heading for the same target, kind of feel like you're on track. Like you kind of think, I think we're going to win this. I think we're going to win this. That build and that momentum is the best place in the world to be. It's so motivating. It's so exciting. And
like a flywheel that you're creating, that, and you start seeing it spin. And
exactly. And it engenders in people this sense of belonging. It's like, oh, I'm part of something. I'm doing something it's gonna happen. That's what I'm trying to build here. And that process that you have to go through of, forget about the past, like don't worry about the old days. I know we said we'd do this before and it's not been successful. We're doing it a different way. It's so reminiscent of what you go through when you've got a team that, you look at the end of 2013 season for Team Sky. We were going into 2014 and, Bradley and Freemy weren't talking to each other and the team was split in the middle. And it was like, Jesus Christ, we're going to be hanging on by our teeth here. And 2014 was probably our worst year as a team, except for our first season. And that building back up again, that was amazing. We came out the gates in 2015, all guns blazing. It's the year that Richie Port like ripped up the early part of the season. And I think that is the best bit. And I think that's the bit that I'm trying to get people here to come on board with, which they are. You can see it happening now with the critical mass of people.
Can you tell me a little bit about what you're seeing in the market right now in cycling clothing? Because like I said, I know that things seem to be winding up again. I know that the post-COVID glut, like I've talked about this ad nauseum, but it was a tough time, too much inventory, lots of it's so funny because you literally can wake up one day, call up a company in northern Italy, create 100 jerseys and 100 bib shorts, open up an Instagram, open up a Shopify, and you've got a cycling brand, right? And it feels like there were too many brands in the market for a long time. That's just sort of my point of view from what I've seen over the past few years. What are you seeing in the market right now in the clothing market?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a lot more competition than there was before, for sure, and there is, a more informed consumer that has far more choice, and I think that's not a bad thing. I think the industry will consolidate slightly, particularly over the next 2 years. I think, to your point, we blew out very wide with loads and loads and loads of brands, all of them kind of probably in that 5 to 25 million, if they're lucky, 25, I'd
Sure.
imagine.
Right.
And, like you said at the very beginning of this, apparel is a tough gig. It's a
Right now
inventory.
it is,
I
particularly
just,
right now, because the
I
barriers
think,
to entry got so low.
yeah, but I also just think it's actually a tough business, because it's you need cash, you need money. Like cash is a tricky thing to generate from an apparel perspective because you tend to have to buy your inventory, sit on your inventory, sell your inventory. So breaking that model in terms of moving to more of a drop model, moving to how you can phase your stock through your business and not end up with these big moments in time where you're sat on loads of working
Discount, yeah.
capital. Yeah, so I think it is just a tricky business, full stop, and it has been particularly tricky for the last 4 years.
After COVID.
Yeah, after COVID, yeah, exactly. So I think what I'm seeing in the market is some great challenger brands who have really established themselves and are doing, in some cases, a great job. And I think it's our job to get back in the front foot and get back out in front. But I think like I said, it's we've probably got another certainly 6 months of hard work to get to where I feel we can go out into market and be like, right, we're back. And I think that will be the moment of truth, I think, in some ways. But yeah, I think that the market's still a bit too busy, very noisy, lots of people with lots of stuff all the time. And I think, finding a way to be differentiated and to be appealing and to be, premium and all the things that we want to be and have historically been gets harder and harder.
And you guys have decided to have a full distribution network now, where initially Rapha was D2C only.
Mm-hmm.
This, to me personally, makes so much sense because there's only so much you can do D2C. It's limiting the capital expenditures for D2C. I mean, we saw YT had so much pressure, discounting pressure, that all of the cash flow kind of erosion, all of the margin erosion just gets pushed right up to the head office. So I think, me personally, from a standpoint of a healthy brand, distribution is everything. Like,
Yeah.
and I think that for a long time, people thought that D2C was like this magic wand and everything was going to go D2C, and it's not that. And especially because you're going to find a lot of people spend time in bike shops. I mean, come on, like it's such a magical place to discover cycling and to learn about cycling. So can you talk about that strategy and how you guys see your channel strategy moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a much more diverse channel strategy than the business has ever had before. And I think relatively new to this business, having what we call it here a wholesale channel, which is like, as you say, selling through third parties. I think it is absolutely right for the business. And I think, certainly from a market entry perspective, testing and learning in territory, acquisition of new customers and different price point customers, also showcasing, what we are and who we are to a completely new audience. It absolutely has its place and it's very important. I think we probably have been a little bit opportunistic, and I think have gone after it maybe slightly too aggressively and been a bit too over saturated in certain markets. So one of the things that we'll be doing is rationalizing that channel down, recognizing the role it plays and how important it is, but really using it for that as that sort of strategic lever in, like I say, in new markets or for new customers or in certain spaces that we wouldn't otherwise be able to show up. So it's incredibly important to us, but I think it needs a bit of a reset internally. And then with regards to the rest of the channel mix, I think our clubhouses are incredible. We have 22 of them. We're just about to open one in Shanghai in October. So, I think making sure that they're delivering on their promise of being truly clubhouses where we can have like an RCC chapter based within them, that they have a retail proposition, but they're also a place for our community to meet, spend time, to get better on their bikes, to sort of commune around this sport that we love. And I think that for us is really the unique proposition, right? Because no one else has that. We know our competitors have stores, but ours aren't stores, ours are clubhouses, and with a genuine paid membership who have a real affinity to the brand in each of those territories. So, and then we have our pure play D2C, which is our e-com, into 14 countries. Sorry, into 14 different languages. 120 countries I think we serve now. So yeah, it's a complex mix, and it probably isn't what you would start with if you were coming in as a new CEO trying to do a turnaround, because it's like, oh, okay, like just looking at the P&L is tricky because you've got hundreds of different territories, lots of different channels, lots of different areas to look at from both a revenue level and a cost level. So it's definitely complex, but I think ultimately will be our competitive advantage, because we have so much agility in that channel mix. We can switch and change, and once we get better with our supply chain, I think which we're very much in the process of doing, I think we will be a force to be reckoned with, because that footprint's been put down.
Wow. So I want to be respectful of your time, Fran, but this has been amazing. I think being able to discuss all these topics with you has been a real opportunity for me, and really appreciate you taking the time. If anyone wants to get in touch with you, or if I guess, I don't know, what's the best place to find you?
Well, everyone seems to find me Wyatt, so it should be easy, but just Fran Millar on both Instagram and X.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Fran, and I look forward to seeing you around events and things like that. This was a lot of fun.
Likewise, thanks so much for having me, Wyatt. I really appreciate it.